You know, it's amazing. I was involved in a Christian church as well as Muslims are involved in their church or religion or faith, whatever you want to call it. And I was told what God's reward was. For Muslims, it's taking over the world, and then it's what? Virgins in heaven. Christians, it's taking over the world, right? And I get prosperity and divine health and power over the enemy. And then I get heaven, right? But that's the reward while we're here on this earth. Is God will take care of our physical bodies and a physical deal with what men are telling us his reward for us is? Don't you know that God's greatest reward he gave to your prophet and the prophets, Matthew, Mark, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, was that he spoke to them? That is God's greatest reward. Everything else is a waste. If you can't hear God's voice and you can't obey his voice, that's where the peace comes from. That's where the power comes from. That's where the deliverance comes from. When God spoke to me in a parking lot 25 years ago, and he told me everything's going to be all right as a person walked past me and kept walking past me. That was God guaranteeing me that if I'm faithful to him, he'll be faithful to me. Now I walk in his power. Now I walk in his name. Now, as long as I'm faithful to him, and there's precedence. God has instructed me because I deal with different things than other people deal with. You deal with a separate thing. Earthly, fleshly temptation of a devil. But that's where we get the power over the devil. But the teachers that teach you and the expert that teach you and the scholars, they have all sorts of things to say, but they never say one thing. That they heard the voice of God. What else separated Abraham from his country? What else separated Elijah from any other man? Baal's prophets in his day. What separated Daniel? What separated your prophet Muhammad? What separated Matthew or Mark? What separated the prophets in the Old Testament? Was they obeyed God's voice. None of them were taught by a man, went on their way, and was blessed by God for all the blessings. God instructed them what he wanted, what he required for each individual person. None of them subjected themselves under another man. And that was traditionally what I was doing. I traditionally, since I could remember, went to another man. My parents brought me to another man. He taught me what he thought God desired for me and what rewards he thought God would have for me. But how were the prophets rewarded? How were the prophets rewarded? Were they taught of how God desired for their lives? Name me one. Name me one that was rewarded by God because he obeyed the words of a prophet. Abraham didn't obey what he heard from the Garden of Eden. He didn't siphon off of that. He had a relationship with God. Right? That separated him. And he was blessed. But you can't show me in either phase. The problem is I wasted 20 years of my life listening to people who said they were experts. That how do you know what God's will for me is if I don't hear him for myself? I was being lied to because the dude that was teaching me from the Bible, which translates to your Quran. How do we know what God's plan for us is? He dropped the book on us and he said, you figure it out? Are you serious? Then why didn't he tell your prophet Muhammad, go find a prophet that's walking around, obeying the voice of God, and learn from him? Why did God teach your prophet? What his plan for him was. There were a lot of prophets back in the day. When Elijah came and said to God, he said, hey, I'm the only prophet. What's going on here? And God said, what, are you serious? I have many prophets. Meaning, I don't just talk to you. I talk to many of my children. Right? That's what he told Elijah. And it's amazing. It was unbelievable that God would have other people that he talks to. And he doesn't have just Elijah. But those people were accountable for what God required of them, and then they were blessed. What is better, virgins? Because that's what your experts are telling you. Conquering the world? You serious? That's what my Christian experts, evangelists were telling me. But or prosperity? They're experts in deciphering a book. And then they tell you they can decipher what God thinks his plan is for your life and the multitudes. When did it ever happen? When did any man come down and go, you know what, I got a plan for you. Here it is. Not only is it a plan for me, but it's a plan for everybody else. Everybody has to do this. And God gave me the authority to tell you his plan that he gave to me is the plan for everyone. Name me one. God's prophet said, you come to him. When Moses went to Pharaoh, he didn't tell Pharaoh what to do. It wasn't his business. Now, sometimes God would speak to a prophet and tell us what he said to that prophet. And that prophet goes and obeys God. But when Moses walked into Pharaoh's chambers, he said, you know what God told you to do. It's none of my business. But my message is obey his voice. My question to you is, why are you not obeying his voice? Why are you obeying the words of experts and scholars who tell you they know God's plan for your life, but never tell you that they heard the voice of God? That separates men. That separates prophets. To be prophets is they hear the voice of God and obey him. But they never run around and say, you know what God has for me? I want God to do it for you. Elijah walked into a home of the woman in Zarephath. No, she wasn't blessed because she blessed the prophet. She was blessed because God told Elijah, get off your tail right now, because I have commanded a woman to feed you. Then we found out that God spoke to another person besides Elijah. He was the only one that God was talking to. But there was a little woman that was about to eat her last piece of bread and die with her son. And God said, I got provisions for her. And he actually told Elijah what he said. Because God wasn't just speaking to Elijah in that day. And she was blessed not because she gave to the prophet or obeyed the words of the prophet. Remember what God said. God said, and this is how perverted these evangelists are. They tell you that you're going to be blessed because you obey the words of a prophet. You can't find me one. But I started to read that with the shingles off my eyes, the blinders off my eyes. And I said, that's not what the scriptures are saying at all. They're saying, and an account is made where she didn't get blessed because she blessed the prophet. She was blessed because she obeyed God. God said, get up now, because I have commanded a woman in Zarephath that you don't even know. But there's one woman that I talked to. Go find her. Knock on her door. And she obeyed God. She wasn't rewarded because she obeyed the words of a prophet. We keep thinking we're going to obey the words of a prophet and we get rewarded. But there were many, many, many widows in that town. One was rewarded because they gave to a prophet? No. One was rewarded because she gave to a prophet because God commanded her to. I don't care how many women were in that town. I don't care how many widows were there in that town. I don't care how many widows would have given to that prophet. She was blessed because she obeyed the voice of God. Why are you, Muslim friend or Christian friend, obeying the words of experts, scholars, and thinking you'll be blessed? God's reward is when you hear his voice.